Right, so there we are. I'm going to talk to the slides. It's unfortunately a bit difficult to interact with you, but I'm going to maybe talk for about 50 minutes or so, and then we'll have question and answer. So this is my topic today, teacher research from first steps to mentoring. First of all, before we do begin though, would you like to just introduce yourself very briefly in the question and answer section? Maybe just write your name, where you are and what kind of students you teach, for example, secondary school or college or primary school, etc. Or I know that most of you are teaching online though at the moment, or if you can, or maybe sometimes you can't. Different situations around the world. It'd be nice to know where you are.
I can tell you that we've got quite a large number of people from South America, Mexico, Peru, Ecuador. We've got people in the Philippines, Turkey, lots of people from different parts of India. So it's very multicultural and very global at the moment.
That's fantastic. So we were hoping that having the webinar at this time might enable people from Latin America, for example, to participate. And if my friends in Latin America, I say hello to you and to South Asia, and welcome to everybody that I don't know. And another question to ask you, have you done teacher research before? I'm going to explain what teacher research means in a minute, but just off the top of your head, if you write yes or no, and that will give us a better idea of who we are talking to today. So just write yes or no. Have you done teacher research before? I'll ask Becky in a minute just to tell me the kind of mix we have today. This is what I plan to do. I plan to talk to you quite a lot actually about sort of background to teacher research, to mentoring, before I start to talk about the book which we are actually launching with this webinar. You can see the cover on the right. And then I'm going to talk, I know that some of you will be people who are just getting interested in maybe doing some teacher research, not necessarily mentors of teacher research. And so I will talk with you about how you can get started with teacher research. And then also for those of you who have done teacher research and who may be thinking maybe that you'd like to become a mentor for others of teacher research, there'll be something for you as well. And that's certainly a step that you can go into after you've done your own teacher research, is to start to think about how you might mentor other people, other teachers. And we'll end with some questions and answers.
Most of the responses so far, Richard, have been yes, that most people have had experience of teacher research. One person was saying yes if it's the same as action research. We've got a small number saying no.
Good. Okay, we'll be talking about different types of teacher research a little bit later. Okay, that's good to know. Well, a bit background to what I'm talking about today. And I will be talking mainly from the perspective of imagining that you might have done teacher research already and you might be wanting to start to help other teachers to do teacher research. But you will know that many teachers think when they hear the word research, they have certain images. And the images that teachers and many people have is that research is not really for them. It's something that's done by scientists or by university academics. So that here are some very typical kinds of images that people have about research with a microscope and the woman in the lab coat, the white lab coat, in a laboratory. So when you are thinking about teacher research, or when you're thinking of introducing other teachers to teacher research, we have to start really by thinking about what we mean by research. And we're not meaning research of this kind. We're thinking of research as something which is close to the lives, close to the work of teachers, and something that can be quite useful for teachers, not something that's very, very far from their experience. Although the image they may start with may be that research is not really for them. So I hope that by the end of today, if you need to be persuaded, you'll see that research can be something that teachers themselves can engage in. Another image that you may have from your university experience is research as something quite burdensome, involving a lot of reading, and you might imagine it has to involve reading a lot of journal articles, etc. And I want to try to show you that it doesn't have to be like that, that the starting point for teacher research is not really what you read, it's more what you experience in the classroom. And another image that teachers may have before they agree to do teacher research or think about doing teacher research is that they may think that they may expect that they're going to have to write a report, maybe something like they had to write at university. And that, again, they may feel is not for them because their lives are so busy. And of course, we know that teachers' lives and your lives are very busy and full of all sorts of tasks, especially perhaps these days, both at home and at work. So the kind of research I'm going to be talking about doesn't have to involve a lot of reading. It doesn't even have to involve writing at the end of it. I mean, there are other ways of sharing research, which could be talking to a group, using posters, for example. And we'll see some pictures of teachers who've decided to do that rather than writing. So all the way through, I'm going to be talking about teachers like these. I'm not thinking of teachers in small classes in Britain. I've worked quite a lot with teachers in South Asia, and I'll show you some pictures of teachers in South Asia, different countries in South Asia who have done teacher research in their classrooms. So this is part of my trying to show that it is something that can be done by ordinary teachers in quite difficult circumstances of primary schools, secondary schools. It's not necessarily just for university teachers. The kinds of teacher research I've been developing have been trying to be very close to the realities of teachers with large classes, with many lessons a week, without very much time to do things outside their class. So here's one teacher, here's another classroom. These are the kinds of classroom where the teachers can be a researcher, and this is what I'll be trying to show. These are classrooms in different countries in South Asia, and we also have some pictures of classrooms in different countries in Latin America. Again, you can see these are ordinary secondary school classes, primary school classes, in public education systems, in Africa as well. And so these are the kinds of classroom, these are the kinds of teacher that we are thinking about today. When you begin to introduce teachers to research or to teacher research, we need a few definitions. I like to keep things as simple as possible, the language as simple as possible. This is part of the attempt to try to show that research is something for teachers themselves. So we need to try to avoid jargon. We need to try to avoid overcomplicated expressions or words. So I found a few definitions. You may like to think of your own definitions of research, which I think are quite down to earth and quite basic, and things that we can see could be part of our lives. Original investigation undertaken in order to gain knowledge and understanding. And sometimes I like to talk to teachers about ways in which research is part of their everyday lives, not necessarily in the classroom, but let's imagine, I mean, we all like to imagine that we can travel again, and you might like to imagine that you can take quite a long journey somewhere. Maybe you might be wondering, should I go by train, should I go by airplane, or by some other means of transport? And we will basically usually do a little bit of research with certain questions in our mind about which is the best means of transport, with different things to consider. And we will get some information, and then we will make our decision. You could say that's a kind of research. That's one kind of example. So I like this definition because it breaks the process of research down into steps, easy steps, or easy to understand steps. We could say that research involves formulating a question, getting necessary information, and I'll introduce one technical word which is useful when talking with teachers, which is data. Data means information which is helping you to answer a particular question. So we could call that gathering necessary data. And then interpreting this information in relation to the question, so that answering the question according to the data that you have gathered. So that's also a very kind of down-to-earth, simple definition of research. Well then, what's teacher research? Many of you say that you've carried out teacher research, action research being one kind of teacher research. This is Again, these are some quite simple definitions. Research initiated and carried out by teachers into issues of importance to them in their own work. A different definition, addressing questions that arise from your practice by gathering data, analyzing it, and sharing what you find. Kind of slogan, really, which I like, is research by teachers, for teachers, and their students. That slogan or that definition highlights that teachers who decide to do research, they are doing it for their own purposes and for the benefit of their students, for their professional development, really, to understand their classrooms better. I keep saying classrooms, but of course now it's just as relevant in this situation where we are far from our students, maybe. We can try to research online teaching, and we may have many problems in online teaching, which it'd be quite useful to try to research. That's one thing I want to emphasize, that teacher research is something that's useful and practical for teachers, something that can help them address the challenges, address the problems that they have, and make them feel more empowered, actually, more in control of their situations. That might be very relevant these days, I feel. But these are my points of view based on my own experience of doing my own teacher research and based on my experience with teachers in different places. And the different places that I have worked with teachers in the kinds of classrooms I showed you are mainly Latin America, starting off in Chile. So a lot of the ideas I'm sharing started off in this context of a British Council program in Latin America called Champion Teachers, which has spread to Peru, and it's also spread to Mexico. And here are some of those teachers I worked with 7 years ago in a workshop when this began their teacher research journey. So they were sharing together the different problems that they have in their classrooms, and together they made posters with a problem in the center or questions arising from the problems, and started to think about how they could go and try to find answers to their questions by collecting data in their classrooms. So here's just one example of one of the questions that came from that very first workshop 7 years ago. It was how can we involve parents into the English learning process of their children? And this was something that quite a few teachers felt was a very important question at that time. And it's something that you don't really find much research about if you read journals, or if you read journals of academic research. But it's a good example, I think, of something that is very important to teachers and their learners, but which isn't necessarily, you're not necessarily going to find very much done for you. And therefore, it's something that actually is useful for teachers to take into their own hands to try to find answers. And that's what some of these teachers did. And here's just one of those teachers from that very first year, Mauro, and we'll come across him later again. He said that at the end, after he'd gone through all of his project, for him action research is important because it lights a spark in the darkness of the system. It lights a spark in the mentality of the people who do not want to change, and it lights a spark in the school by making people believe that they own the changes that can be made in any learning environment. So I think that it's useful to share with teachers, when you are introducing teacher research, the experiences of teachers like them. So it may be that you can share an experience of teacher research that you have done yourself, and that's a very good thing to share with the teachers. But it may also be that you can bring stories from other teachers and share how they have benefited from it. And this is another way of persuading teachers. Camilla, another teacher, said we need to stop focusing on our concerns and pay more attention to our students' concerns. And as a result of the project, I feel that I'm more empathetic. So Mauro's conclusion that he feels more empowered, and Camilla's conclusion that she feels closer to her students and understands her students better. From all of these different projects in Latin America and South Asia, these are very common conclusions by teachers, both of these conclusions. And Layla here has a very brief reflection. I heard my students, I saw myself, because that's a very common thing, that through teacher research, students understand things from their students' perspective much better, and that this can change their whole mindset, not just to help them solve a particular problem, but to take them forward through their career. The other context which the ideas come from has been the British Council's Action Research Mentoring Scheme in India and Nepal. And you can see some details of this scheme there on the screen. And you can see a teacher there actually presenting some of her findings at what was called a Mela, a festival, and it shows you that you don't have to write a report. You can present findings to others through a poster. Here is one of the other posters that a teacher produced at the end of their project. Again, you can see this is in India this time. You can see that this is again a very important problem, very important issue for many teachers, and something that teachers can find out answers to by, well, this teacher did interviews with teachers, other teachers, also questionnaires with students, and managed to find some interesting answers to this question. And again, here's a teacher who is sharing her findings. That's from some teachers' points of view. I'm now going to try to share a video of Krishna Dixit, who was one of the mentors, because we're going to start to think about mentoring. He was one of the mentors on that first In the Arms project about 2 years ago. So I'm going to try to share my video. If it doesn't work, Becky, you'll tell me that it doesn't work, and we will do it in a different way. Let me try.
Okay, so I think we do have a little problem with the video. We can see it playing, but I don't think we can hear it.
You can't hear it. So is it possible for you to show this video then?
Yep. So my colleague is going to set it up in the background and just have a pause. In the meantime, we've had a lot of comments, more people from lots of different places, Nepal and Nigeria. Lots of people interested in action research and have experience of it. So there's a lot going on here. And we've also got a few questions ready for later on as well.
That's great. So please do keep writing in the question and answer, and we'll try to take account of it a bit later. I can't actually see that, so but it's good for you to interact while the webinar's going on. I'll occasionally ask you a few questions as well.
Okay. Dipali, are we able to show the video? Okay, let me, I'm going to try and show the video from, this is the first video, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so bear with me.
By the way, these videos are all online, and I'm going to give you the link later. These are interviews with different mentors from the ARMS project, and it goes together with the book that I'm going to be describing in a minute.
Okay, I hope this works.
I think we can move on probably just because of the time, and the links to the videos are quite. I'll give you some links to access the videos. It's just that these different mentors like Krishna share some very interesting insights into teacher research from Indian mentors' perspective as well. So I think we'll move on, actually, Becky, to the next slide.
Fine.
Yeah. So I hope we can go to the slides again. Are you able to see this at the moment? The next slide. Are you able to see this now? Hello? Hello?
Hi. So in the meantime, I'm just going to try and play the video again.
Okay.
Classroom-based research is something that actually helps teachers in knowing themselves, their classes, their students, and their working context. It has always been debated in literature about teacher education that classroom research or teacher research or exploratory research, I mean, these are the other labels by which this is known, is different from research with that capital R, which is actually thought to be a bit prestigious and a bit, I mean, superior to the research undertaken by uh, teachers in their classrooms. So in academic research, usually what happens is it's highly formalized and it's a bit frightening. I mean, that is the impression most of the teachers have. They say that, okay, I am just a teacher, I am not cut for this sort of research. But classroom research is highly liberating and it's transforming because it's about understanding ourselves and our students. It's meant for our own professional development. If I had to give you an example, I can say that teachers have the license actually to work with, let's say, 50 living brains in the classroom. They have that license. They can just do anything with those students. And if they have that sort of license, and it has certain implications that they must make very wise, informed decisions while working with students. And this wisdom comes from exploring the issues. What is the classroom? Who are my students? What are their needs? What is the curriculum that I'm teaching? And what are they supposed to learn? Are they really learning? What sort of feedback should I give? So these are the, I mean, essential, quintessential things in any pedagogic process.
Okay, thank you for that. So for sharing that, Becky. Just checking you can see my slides okay. I'm just going to go back to from current slide. Is that okay? Can you see this? Can you see the slides okay? Hello?
Yes, there we go.
Good. That's great. So let's start. That was Krishna, who was the mentor for a group of teachers on that the ARMS program. So we'll start to talk a little bit about mentoring and why mentoring is useful for helping teachers to get started. It is helpful to teachers get started with teacher research. I mean, teachers can try to start up on their own, but it's very useful to have somebody to give you some mentoring. I'm going to define what I mean by mentoring in a minute, and to maintain motivation during the process. But if we go down, if we go to the right, mentoring doesn't necessarily come naturally. This is what we're going to be talking about, how we can get better at mentoring. Training is valuable. One reason to be interested in mentoring is that if mentoring can be developed, then the numbers of people doing teacher research will increase. And this is really the background, the idea for the handbook coming out of the ARMS mentoring scheme in particular. So I think we need a definition together, all of us today, about what is mentoring. Because, yeah, so here are again some rather simple definitions. There's a lot being written about mentoring in general, but today I'm going to focus on mentoring teacher research. But mentoring in general, you could define as sharing knowledge, skills, and experience in order to encourage and empower another person. So the definition that we're using is mentoring is not the same thing as advising or telling someone how they should be teaching. It's more about listening, asking lots of questions, guiding somebody, but not trying to encourage them to find their own path. And I think that's quite an important thing to bear in mind. So we could say that it involves enhancing teachers' autonomy to develop for themselves and increasing their willingness to take control of their own learning. So not judging or directly advising them and not telling them all the answers. So that's the idea of mentoring that we are working with. We're going to move on past that video. That was another mentor, Chandeep, and you can watch the videos later. She was going to talk about mentoring, what mentoring means for her. But let's move on to the second part of today's webinar to introduce the book. And this is the title of the book, Mentoring Teachers to Research Their Classrooms, a Practical Handbook. To give a little bit of background to the book and why it's been published, there's as I said, been quite a lot, well, no, I didn't say this, but there has been a lot written about teacher research in general. Action research being especially what a lot has been written about. There's also been a lot written about mentoring teachers and how to mentor teachers in general, but there's a lack of literature, lack of things written on how to mentor teachers to research their classrooms. So we gained a lot of experience from the ARMS project in particular, and with that experience, British Council asked me to write this book because I was involved in together with Amal Padwad, who you may know in India. We were mentoring the mentors in that first year of the ARMS project. So there seems to be a need for such a book, and a handbook hasn't been produced before, which is quite a practical handbook with activities based on experience of how to mentor teachers to do teacher research. So here is where you can get the publication, a simple website there, and it's free, it's downloadable off the internet, and we hope that you will go there and have a look at it. And I'd like to say also that all of the resources I'm going to mention, because I'm also going to mention some other books which are freely available from the British Council especially, they're all available from a website that I've produced for this webinar, and you can see that website there, and that address, the warwick.ac.uk address, it's at the bottom of every slide, almost every slide from now on, in case you want to go there. So you can go to the book from here, but you can also find some other useful resources. They're useful for you as teachers if you've never done teacher research before. In particular, there's one called a handbook for exploratory action research, which I think you'll find useful. And there are resources for mentors as well, people wanting to become mentors. So who is the book for? It's for teacher educators, teacher trainers who are maybe mentoring teachers or student teachers to do teacher research at the moment. And as I said, it's maybe not just classroom practice these days, it's maybe online teaching practice. Also for people who might think they might be interested in doing being a mentor for other teachers, and also for decision makers. So what's in the book? It's divided into two parts. The first part is foundations. The second part is takes you through the process of teacher research. As I said, it's a book for generally people who know research a little bit themselves, who've done teacher research themselves. For teachers, there's probably better to look at the handbook for exploratory action research, which is a different book. So it takes you through. I've been starting to introduce teacher research with you today, which is what I always do at the beginning of mentoring teachers to do research. It goes through what mentoring is. We talked a little bit about that today. We talked also about what particularly is involved in mentoring teacher research. These will be things that you'll see in a minute on the right-hand side. Talks about how to get started, maybe how to organize a workshop with teachers, how to plan a timeline, how to communicate, keep records, and also talking about the importance of reflecting on your practice as a mentor. On the right-hand side, these are the difficult things for teachers doing research, which have come out of our experience. It's difficult for teachers to select a topic, so we give advice about how to help teachers to do that. It's quite difficult for teachers to develop research questions, so we give a lot of advice about how to help teachers to do that. Then it's another area of difficulties for teachers to decide on how to get data, and then how to analyze it, how to plan action, taking them into more action research, and then finally how to share and reflect on their research. So that's the process of teacher research. Each unit has these characteristics. It's got key points, it's got some information on why it's important, it's got a lot of input, but also a lot of reflection and activities, tasks. And then there's got some guidance for going to finding other information. And there's also a QR code which takes you to those interviews that we showed you one of them at the beginning. And today I want to focus on these parts of the book. I've already been doing things with you about how to introduce teachers to teacher research, and we're going to move to the first 3 steps, how to help teachers with these first 3 steps. So let's start with introducing teacher research. And apart from giving definitions, and apart from sharing your experience of teacher research, it's really useful to share stories with teachers, and if possible, stories of teachers who are in some way like the people that you're going to be working with. So this is a story, for example, from a book that's been edited by Janak Negi in Nepal, and Shova Shahi wrote her story of her teacher research project. So it's a quite simple story, but I think it gives a good idea of the process of teacher research in quite difficult circumstances. So Shova has teachers in a secondary school in Nepal. As you can see, her problem was, I have difficulties managing a large class. She had quite a large number of students in one class, 89, and she found it very difficult to manage a large classroom. I think many of you will have similar experiences. She found that there was often a kind of disturbance, students were talking. She tried many things before she started her teacher research, but it didn't seem to work. Like she changed seats of students every day, she gave authority to classroom monitors, divided them into different groups. None of this worked, so she wanted to try to explore the situation a bit more. But the kind of research I'm going to be talking about with you is we call it exploratory action research, and it has 2 stages. The first stage is exploring the situation before you move into trying to take action to solve something. So this is the first stage of her research. She needed to, the mentor needed to help her to think of some questions, research questions. Her questions would be, what are the difficulties then? What causes the disturbance in the classroom? To just try to find out a bit better about this situation before she tried to find out some new solution. The methods, we might call them methods, and all of the methods I'll talk about with you have been things that teachers busy teachers in difficult circumstances have managed to do. So these are all quite practicable methods. You may or may not have a colleague who can help you by observing your class. Well, she did in this case, but if you don't, you can always try to step back a little bit, take notes sometimes as you do the class. That's what she did occasionally, but also just immediately after the class, she would take some notes about what she was seeing. Well, she was lucky to have a colleague to observe her class, and this is what the colleague said. The colleague found that most of the students were paying attention, but some of the students who were near the windows were looking outside. And then they're talking to their neighbor about what they saw. And then just a few others were talking unnecessarily in other ways. But that was the main problem. So Shova managed to identify the main problem, which was that it was students by the window who were looking outside and then talking about what they were seeing, and then other students talking about those people looking out of the window. That was the first time that she managed to really identify what the real problem was. So she came to the conclusion that students looking outside through the windows were the main cause of the disturbance in the classroom. And on that basis of understanding the situation, she developed a plan. So her plan was going to be to give the students who were sitting by the window more responsibility, and the people sitting next to them. That was the first part, and the second part was when they did start talking unnecessarily, she would move closer to them. Quite a simple story, but I think the story shows that how practical and useful teacher research can be, and I think it could be that other teachers would find the same thing. So after this action, she observed, I think she asked her colleague to come and observe again. She took some notes herself, and she does find that the situation has improved. It hasn't completely stopped children talking, but they don't talk unnecessarily. They've started talking more about the subject matter. And she feels that sense of being, a sense of achievement and sense that she can actually deal with her classroom problems in a better way. When you introduce teacher research to teachers, I think sharing stories is a major thing that you can do to to make them realize it could be for them, it could be useful for them. One of you mentioned that you'd done action research before, and that's often the kind of research that it's talked about, teacher research that's talked about. We can also talk about exploratory research or exploratory practice. With Shova, you actually saw both kinds of research. You saw at first an exploratory research, where she was trying to understand the situation, and then she moved into taking action and trying to see whether that action helped to solve the problem or not. Let me talk a little bit about action research, because it's the kind of teacher research that most people know about. I suppose it would start with planning an action. You've got a problem, you reflect on the issue, and then you make some plan to improve the situation. You put it into practice, you act, you observe. It doesn't only mean just watching. It could be giving a questionnaire or other ways of finding out whether the action was successful. Then you reflect, and if you solve the problem, well, maybe you go on to a new problem, or if you haven't quite solved the problem, you maybe go back and try something new. So there's a kind of cycle involved. So that's action research, and you may want to share this with teachers, these stages. But what we've developed in Latin America, and we've also been adopting this approach in India and Nepal, is what we call exploratory action research. So as you can see from these steps, and by the way, you can choose to introduce the cycle, like in that last slide. I sometimes think that it looks a little bit over scientific, a little bit maybe scary or frightening. So I think I prefer this way of showing things myself, which is a step-by-step thing. But you can choose your own way of presenting this. And the important thing is to try to present in a way that makes teacher research not seem something frightening, not seem something too scientific, perhaps, something that teachers will want to do. So it's about exploring. It's about exploring first, and only then later taking action, because then the action that you take can be based on a solid foundation of really understanding the situation. And we find that this is a more gradual introduction to teacher research than going straight into action research. And so from one teacher's point of view, why is it useful to explore before taking action? Daniel was a teacher in Chile in the Champion Teachers Program. He said that he thought that the students didn't really like him using English in class. He felt that the students were not enjoying it, were not understanding it. That was the question in his mind, was what do they think about my class? Well, he really thought that actually they didn't think that, and he was planning to do a different kind of class where he didn't speak in English. But the mentor encouraged him to explore the situation first by asking the students, well, what do you think about me speaking English as a teacher in class? And what he said was, from the exploration, that it was really surprising, because before that he thought they didn't want the class to be in English. But he did a questionnaire, in fact. In their answers, the majority of them said they wanted the class in English. And it was a total change of his point of view. He did understand better the problems they were having, and so he managed to go and do some improvements after this action research. But for him, this was the main thing that he learned, but it was through exploring. It wasn't through doing the action research. Okay, so today I've been talking really about how to encourage teachers to become involved with teacher research. It's just what I can do today with you is simply a taster, and I'm hoping that I'm getting some of you interested in the idea of mentoring. I'm hoping that it will help some of you who are already mentoring reflect on your experiences, and those of you who haven't done teacher research before, I'm hoping that you might get interested. But today is just a taster, really. All I can do is just give you a taster, because it takes time, it takes longer to take the steps. But let's go through some first steps of how to get started with teacher research. The first step is to select a topic. Teachers have many problems in their classrooms. We can't try to address all of the different problems all at the same time. So we need to select a topic to work on for teacher research. Let's look at that together. So there's a whole unit about it, and I'm just going to share a few ideas from that unit. Seem to be different possible starting points for teacher research. Could be something that's worked in your classroom that you'd like to explore further. It doesn't happen very often, but I think this is possibly a good starting point. Think about how what's working and trying to research why it's working, perhaps, and how you could extend that into your future work. It's very often the case that teachers start with something that you're unsure about. I think Daniel started with that, in not being really sure whether the students liked him using English in the class or not. Something that's not working and you would like to improve, a problem basically. In Shova's case, you could write in the chat box, perhaps write in the question and answer. Do you think her starting point was something that was working, or something not working, or something unsure? You could just write working, not working, or unsure. Well, I would say that it was, in her case, it was something that, well, both really. It was both really. Something that she felt wasn't working because she really felt it was a problem that the students were making a noise. At the same time, she knew that she wasn't really sure about the reasons for it, and that's why she started with the exploration. So I guess both, unsure and not working. We don't have a possibility of interacting, unfortunately, today, but you could think about your recent teaching experiences, I guess mainly online teaching experiences. You could think about it now from your point of view. There may be many different things that you think about as possible topics, from something you're pleased about, something you were unsure about, something you were unhappy about. You might just take a note on a piece of paper about different possible starting points. And you can ask teachers to do this as well in a workshop. If you have too many possible topics, we'll move on because for reasons of time.
We did have a couple of people say that they thought it was because it wasn't working and unsure why.
Okay, they were right. They were right in those. Thanks, Becky. Now, what happens then is actually, as teachers, we have so many different possible problems or puzzles or things that we might be pleased about, and it's important to remember we do have things that we are pleased about, and we can build on that. It's not just about problems or puzzles. This might be helpful to help teachers to narrow down to one topic, because I think it's important that you have one topic to start with, and you leave the others to later. Okay, they can be future research topics. So you can think about topics in terms of how realistic is it going to be to do some research to try to understand this topic better. How manageable, in other words. How urgent is it? You know, sometimes things are really, really important, that they need to be solved very immediately. How significant, I think we mean by that, how useful will it be, not just for yourself or your students, but for other teachers and other students in your school or elsewhere? And finally, how engaging, how interesting is it going to be for you? So you can give points like 10 points out of 10 for topic number 1, for topic number 2, topic number 3. That can help you to decide on one topic. Now, you need to choose one topic, and if you're thinking from your point of view now, you're going to need more time to choose the topic, I think. Anyway, that's what you need to do if you're going to start doing some teacher research. Do feel free to share an area, if you've chosen an area that you'd like to focus on, a problem or a topic that you'd like to focus on in the Q&A. But we won't have. If we had more time, we could deal with those together, but unfortunately, I've got to move on. So we move on to developing research questions, and I always think this is quite hard, difficult, but it's the most important step. Once you've got questions, that sets the direction, that gives you the direction in your research, any kind of research. So again, we have the unit in the book all about this, and let's just start with something quite simple but powerful, I think. Teachers have many problems. I keep saying that, and like this, for example, in large classes in difficult circumstances, Miriam has this issue, and this is a workshop that I did with Amal quite a number of years ago. She told us that she got too much homework to mark. It's impossible to give effective feedback to everyone in a large class, I think 80 children, 80 students. So there were many problems. This was a workshop about teaching in low resource classrooms. So what Amal and I decided to do was just try to encourage teachers to change their topic, their problem, into a question, into a how can I question. So you can change any problem really into a how can I question, which gives you a direction forward. You know, how can I provide feedback to students? What different forms of feedback can I use? Makes it something more positive, more forward-looking, and it enables a teacher like Miriam to then go and try to find some answers. And in the workshop that we gave with Amal, we encouraged the teachers to ask each other whether they had any good advice for such situations. This wasn't a workshop about teacher research, so we were just encouraging them to make questions, to be more positive, to take things forward. And I think that's the value of questions. If you can turn a problem into a question, it can take you forward, and it can suggest that you might be able to solve the problem in some way. She had many problems, and we did this with other issues that she had as well. And then she went around interviewing teachers in that workshop as to what their suggestions might be. Now that could take her into some kind of action research. She might go back to her classroom and try out some of the ideas that the teachers suggested immediately and try to see if it worked or not. And that could be a kind of action research. But as I've been telling you, the kind of teacher research that we found worked better than that really, and that was more effective, was something called exploratory action research. So I'm going to show you some examples of how a mentor can ask questions to a teacher to try to make exploratory research questions. So we're not going to go straight to the solution. We're not going to go to giving ideas about what they can do. And that's definitely what a mentor of teacher research should not be doing. A mentor of teacher research should not be saying, okay, your students are motivated. Well, why don't you do this? Why don't you do games? Why don't you play songs? That's what we always tend to do, isn't it? I mean, when somebody comes to us with a problem, we tend to give advice. But that's not the same thing as mentoring. And what we're trying to do with exploratory action research is encourage teachers to explore their problem in their classroom and then come back to us later and say what they've found. And on that basis, maybe start to suggest some possible solutions. So this is what a mentor might do. This is what a mentor might ask to a teacher to try to develop that teacher's research questions. So this teacher comes and says, my students aren't motivated. The mentor might say, mentoring is all about dialogue. It's all about listening carefully and about asking questions. So which students are motivated? All of them or just some of them? Which ones? So the teacher says, I'm not sure. Oh, so perhaps one of your research questions could be which students say they are demotivated and why? Which students? Now, what I'm just trying to give you a taster of, because these dialogues take much longer than this, is that when we have a dialogue like this, where we're asking questions, sometimes the teacher is going to say, oh, I'm not sure. I don't really know. And those are the perfect times when that can become a research question. Any time that a teacher says, I'm not really sure about that, that can become a research question. So in the book, there's a task where we practice this. And so let's see. The teacher says, I'm concerned that students are always using L1 in my first language in my English class. When you say always, when exactly? I'm not sure, because we have impressions as teachers we're not really sure about when exactly. So perhaps one of your research questions could be, and you might think what the question could be, well, it could be, I think, at what points in the lesson do students use L1, at what points in the lesson, what kinds of activities make them use L1, what kinds of activities make them use English, for example. That could be a good question for the teacher then later to explore. I think we'll just have one more example, maybe this third one here. Teacher says, I want them to use dictionaries, you know, so that they are more independent, but they don't want to use them. No, we often think things about our students, but we're not actually always sure. So the mentor says, are you sure they don't want to use them? Could there be any other reasons why they don't use them? And the teacher says, well, I'm not sure, I didn't think about that. And the mentor sort of jumps in and says, oh, so maybe one of your research questions could be, and I'll leave a space for you to think about it. For example, well, could be, what do students say about using dictionaries in class and outside class? Or how much do students say they use dictionaries outside class, inside class? What reasons do they give? Another question could be, what reasons do they give why they use them or why they don't use them? Those could be really useful research questions for exploring the situation. There was another interview, and we don't have time. So in relation to the issue, this is for you out there. If you've thought of an issue, you can think about this. What makes you concerned? What makes you interested? What evidence do you have? What are you not sure about? What do you still need to know? These are questions to ask yourself if you don't have a mentor. These are questions to ask students if you are mentoring somebody. Ask teachers if you are mentoring a teacher. And that will lead you into exploratory questions. So all I can do is really show this as a taster for you. An example, one more example. My students speak in English only to me, but not to each other. From this, the mentors help this teacher to think of some questions. Some questions are about exploring your own perceptions. For example, in what parts of the class do I think students speak to me? Well, this is a good question. Why do I think it's important for them to speak to one another in English? Questions are often also about others' perceptions, very often about what students think about something. So what do my students think about this? Or in pair work, which students do and don't speak in English? Yeah, and in the other one, in pair work, when do they start speaking in English more positively? So this teacher developed these research questions. You can help teachers, you can help yourself as well, think of research questions by thinking of not just having a dialogue, but thinking of these three categories. Sometimes you can use frames like this to help you to develop research questions. And we talk more about that in the book. So I've spent a little time on research questions because that is a really difficult area for teachers, but also a very, very important area to start the research. So you could, for example, on your piece of paper, start to think of some research questions and start to think about how you can find the answers, because we'll move finally into this area of preparing teachers to collect data. Again, it's going to be rather quick, and there's much more in the book. But we find it useful to all of these different methods, that's all different kinds of data, as you might call, yeah, data. They're all practical kinds of data. As I've said from the beginning, we've been trying to develop a way, an approach to teacher research which is practicable for teachers in their own classrooms. I'll just leave you to look at those, but we've also categorized them under the different kinds of research question. Now, if we just focus on exploring others' perceptions, for example, students' perceptions of some problem, some issue. Teachers very often think, when they think about research, they think about questionnaire immediately. We try to encourage teachers to think in a different way, because making a questionnaire can be quite time-consuming. We actually encourage them often to just start by thinking about asking students at the end of a class, in the last 5 minutes of a class, posing a question to them, saying, I'm interested in what you think about using dictionaries. I'm interested in how much you use them and what you think about them and why you don't use them or why you do use them. Ask them to write about it in their own language, maybe, for 5 minutes at the end of a class. Get the pieces of paper and use that as data to answer your question. That can provide just as much useful information sometimes as a questionnaire which takes much longer to produce. Okay, as I said, there's more about this in the book. And as I said, we've categorized these under different kinds of research question. Okay, that was Mauro, by the way, and I would, if we had more time, I would talk to you a little bit about another story, basically, if you're a mentor. And this story comes from a book about stories of exploratory action research in Chile. I'll give you the link later. You can share these stories, not just to motivate teachers, as we did earlier, but to show how research can be done. That's how I would use this story. I would show his research questions. I would ask the teachers to read it and find out what kinds of data he gets according to these kinds of data. Then I would move into asking them to think, okay, according to your questions, what kinds of data would be suitable for your questions? Okay, this is the last part, and it's simply to say that quite a lot of you have done teacher research and may be thinking about becoming a mentor. Or you have been mentoring maybe, and you're thinking about next steps. So this part is for you, really. It's a reminder of the book, and I think this is, I definitely like to suggest that this is the next place to go for you if you are in that situation. I think you'll find there's a lot of advice for you about the next steps, because after you've done teacher research and you appreciate its value, you may very well be wanting to share that experience with other teachers and seeing how valuable it can be for others. So you can use the book as a step-by-step guide, following the typical path of a mentor, or you can just dip into it unit by unit. They can stand on their own. Could be used on your own or with a colleague or collaboratively in a learning group or in a training scheme for mentors. And I'd like you to consider possibilities of embedding teacher research mentoring within a teacher association that you might be involved with. It already is happening with INET in India, NELTA in Nepal, APIBA Teacher Research SIG, Special Interest Group in Buenos Aires, CAMELTO in Africa, Cameroon, has a research group that's supporting teacher research, or your workplace as well, perhaps. And some possibilities for you as mentors. If you go to the website address right at the bottom of the slide, you'll see a link for a Facebook group that I've set up for mentors to network mentors across different countries. It's never happened before. And there's a website that I'm going to continue to develop. And we also have a kind of course for prospective mentors, which is completely free, done online. And it will happen again in January and February in 2021. So I'm coming to the end now, and I hope you found it interesting. But here are links to these other resources that I've been mentioning. These are also freely available, downloadable books from the British Council. This one is about teachers like Miriam in low resource classrooms. I wrote it with Amol Padwad and with the teachers themselves. And all of these links are in the main website address at the bottom of the page. This is the stories book, which I think we found very useful for introducing teachers to teacher research, based on teachers in Chile. And this is the handbook I wrote with Paula Rebiedo. This is for you if you are a teacher thinking of taking your first steps into teacher research. I'd go to this book, and this will take you through that. Yeah, and we've used this book quite effectively in mentoring teachers in different places. So that brings me, I think, to the end. I'll be able to answer some of your questions, not all of them, unfortunately. So you're very welcome to contact me at the email address there. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope. I'm sorry it was rather quick, and I'm sorry it started late. I hope that it was useful, interesting for you, however. And now I think it's over to some questions and answers.
Yes, thank you, Richard. We've had a lot of people say thank you so much so far for the presentation. They've really enjoyed it. We've got quite a few questions. I just a note to let everyone know we'll try and get through as many questions as we can, but there are a lot, so we won't be able to get through every single one. And also just to let you know that you can complete the feedback form and get a certificate by clicking on the link in the Q&A box now. Okay, so we have got a lot of questions. Let's start perhaps with ethics. Should the students be made aware of the fact that they're being part of a research project?
That is a very good question, and there are different perspectives on that. So all I can give you is my perspective, but you've got to think about that question in the context of your own understanding of the students, your own understanding of your school or institution, and of what might be appropriate in your context. My particular point of view on that is the kind of teacher research that I've been working with teachers. There's been no intention really from the beginning of producing any journal article, and the only sharing that goes on would be without any reference at all to the students, who they are, etc. And it's the purpose of it has been for the teacher to solve problems, to understand what's going on in their classrooms, and as long as the purpose is, that's what the purpose is, I think that's part of teaching. I think that's what teachers, there's nothing special about it. It's part of good teaching, if you like. So my perspective has always been that when it comes to sharing, that's when you need to absolutely get permissions of both parents and children, if they are children. But with adults, it's a different matter. Maybe it's the adults themselves. Okay, but when it's part of the normal course of teaching, and that's the kind of teacher research we've been promoting, I haven't found it so necessary to advise that teachers gain parents' or students' permissions for doing research. It's part of improving the teaching. The whole purpose of it is to improve teaching and learning. But I am starting to think more and more, actually, because teachers do then want to share, and they often, they generally find that after they've done something like that, they do really want to share with others. Not usually by writing, but often through presentations. But even so, at that point, they sometimes find it hard to get permission, retrospectively, because they're not in touch with those students. And that is absolutely necessary, that they should do that if they're going to share anything which identifies those children. So I've started to think that actually it's best to sort that all out right at the beginning. So my thinking these days is that actually it is important to make sure that you discuss issues of ethics and permissions within your institution, and getting consent from parents and children is the best idea.
Great. What about, so someone is asking, can action research be done without a mentor? And if that is possible, how can we ensure validity? Okay,
it's definitely possible to do this without a mentor. Everything I've been saying today has been framed in the context of mentoring and of encouraging mentoring and developing mentoring, because it can create a great support for teachers, especially teachers who've never thought about the idea of doing teacher research before. But I mean, some of you here today who are teachers who haven't thought about, you have thought about doing teacher research because you've come to this webinar, so you've already taken the first steps. You've already got an interest. So absolutely, I would encourage you to go further by looking, for example, looking at the handbook for exploratory action research, or perhaps, if you like, looking at some of the stories which are available through the link I gave. Mentors are not there to say that you're doing it right or wrong. The whole idea of mentoring that I've been describing has been to support teachers in their own development. And the way I think about teacher research, the kind of teacher research I've been describing, which is for teachers, for their own professional development, not for any external purpose originally, not to get a degree or not to publish in a journal, but for the benefit of the teacher themselves and for the students. As long as the teacher feels that they are learning and that they are becoming more empowered, which I think is often what happens, even though teachers don't necessarily intend that, or as long as the teacher believes that their rapport, that they are becoming to understand their students better, I'm happy to trust the teacher's judgment, and that the teacher is finding benefit in what they are doing. If the teacher is with their questionnaires or with their observation, if they are measuring that there has been some change, there's been some improvement, then that's validation. I think we don't have to worry too much about scientific measures of reliability or validity. We need to think of slightly different criteria, I think, in relation to the kind of teacher research and the kind of context that I've been describing. When we're talking about doing teacher research for other purposes, for example, for a master's program or as part of your degree, that's a different matter, I think. And okay. then we may need to think about, or when you're publishing a journal, to try to generalize about something, that's a different matter.
There have been a couple of questions about using teacher research as a stepping stone to research with a capital R, as you mentioned at the beginning of your session.
I'm glad you say that, because I think that can happen in my experience, that teachers become involved with teacher research for their own understanding, and it's a kind of intrinsically motivated kind of research. Nobody's forcing them to do it. They're doing it because it's useful for them. It's a really good starting point, I think, for further research, which might be more academic. You might be looking at other teachers' classrooms, etc., because you've got your heart in the right place. You're starting with something which is really important in your classroom, in a real classroom, and it can be a great stepping stone into in teachers' actual lives. I've seen teachers who've started with teacher research, then moving sometimes into mentoring, then wanting to publish something, and later then maybe wanting to do a master's or something, some further study where it's more academic research. There are, of course, possibilities of doing teacher research for a PhD or for an MA dissertation. It is possible to do that, but it's a different kind of teacher research from what I've been describing.
Okay, we've probably only got time for a couple more questions. This one is about.
Can I just say one more thing? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Because another situation in which teacher research can be promoted is in teacher training. For example, university-based teacher training. When students are doing practice teaching, you can ask them to do teacher research projects in relation to their practice teaching, and very often that takes place earlier than something they have to do later, which is a kind of dissertation project. And it can be a really good introduction for them into research in general, I've found with my students. Sorry, Becky.
That's fine, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so like I said, we've got 2 questions left. This one is about mentoring. So as a teacher mentor, how do I assess if a teacher is ready for research or teacher research?
Yes, well, we can think about, I suppose we can think about ready in different ways. And if I was with you, I would talk with you about what you mean by ready. When I'm a mentor, I would delay the start of collecting data until I've talked quite a lot with the teacher about definitely about narrowing down their topic to one topic, and but definitely getting a set of research questions and talking with them about how they are planning to answer each question one by one. And once that is clear, I think that's the foundation that you need. I think then the teacher is ready. But I think it's worth spending as much time as is necessary to talk a lot with that teacher before they to get them thinking of research questions which are going to lead them in a useful direction, and not be frustrating for them because they can't get the right data or because the question is too big, etc. And in the handbook, we have parts of the handbook about what does it mean to have a good research question? How can you help teachers to make to think about research questions and improving research questions? So that could be helpful for you.
And do you think newly qualified teachers are capable of doing research, or do you think you need a certain amount of classroom experience before undertaking research?
I would say that in general, the teachers that we work with are teachers who've been working for 2 years, at least 3 years. When you're a novice teacher, you've got so many things that you're concerned about, your planning, and all the new experiences you're having. To some extent, you have to kind of have to have settled into a context to begin to do teacher research. But on the other hand, pretty early in your career, it can be a really good way of developing yourself. And we found that many junior teachers actually find a lot of benefit of getting involved in teacher research.
So the last question I think we've got time for now is taking us perhaps to the current situation. So is it possible to do teacher research outside the classroom? This person's trying to get at that. Can they do teacher research to explore the most effective strategy for online teaching? Yeah,
that's I'm glad that question. I'm glad it's the last question, because I think that question takes us forward very much. Definitely. The title of the book we've just brought out is called Mentoring Teachers to Research Their Classrooms, a Practical Handbook. But of course, we are in the situation where teachers are not in their classrooms. Of course, I think it's relevant still. I would say that, wouldn't I? But I mean, some people talk about classroom research. We haven't been talking about classroom research because it can be teacher research in relation to any situation of teaching, definitely in relation to online teaching. And I would like to think that it is particularly relevant now, because however experienced you are, I'm quite an experienced teacher, you're facing challenges, real difficult challenges. If you've been teaching in difficult circumstances, like large classrooms that I've been describing, you're now teaching in super difficult circumstances. That's my friend and colleague Prem Payak, what he said about teaching in Nepal after the earthquake, because it was difficult already, and now it's super difficult. You have so many problems like not being able to contact your students, for example, not having internet access perhaps, or even if you do, not really knowing how they're responding to your teaching, and so many different difficulties of teaching. And I think if we can, but the problem is like always, we're so busy trying to cope with the situation, we find it hard to step back and just to think, well, what is the main problem I'm facing? And what are the questions would help me to explore this better? But I really feel that if we did start to, and I'm going to try to do this, I'm counting myself as a teacher who's very challenged by, okay, I wasn't in very difficult circumstances before, but now I guess I'm in quite relatively difficult circumstances, because we're all in difficult circumstances. But I think I should think, what are my main problems? What are some questions related to that? And I think I would like to ask probably something like, well, I'm not sure. I really not sure about whether my teaching is getting through to my students, how they're responding. Okay, well, one of my questions should be, what do students say about the kinds of lessons we're having now? That would be a good research question for me. And then go and try to find out with some questionnaire or something. Absolutely relevant, and I think I could learn a lot. I think that teachers can get through this. Maybe it will help teachers get through this situation, just as doing teacher research in difficult circumstances can help teachers cope with those difficult circumstances in a better way. That's what we've discovered. So I encourage you all to think about that and maybe go off and mentor teachers, think about how you might research your practice. But I, of course, I wish you all well and realize that our situations are very difficult, and it may not be possible for you to do that.
Great. Thank you very much, Richard. That's been a really interesting session. We've had lots of people thanking you for inspiring them and for talking about the different topics. Someone said that they had come yesterday and today, and they found both very interesting and even more useful, getting twice a year.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I think everyone.
And can I just say thank you very much to